German, and then we'll have a lively discussion. So I encourage you to participate, to ask questions, to give your opinions by the end of the session. Unfortunately, Antonio Lane was scheduled to participate today, but unfortunately there's been a death in his family. So we are very sorry to hear that, and then we're expressing our deep condolences in this time of grief for his family and himself. So with no further ado, I want to introduce to you to Karina Coburn. She is our new country representative as of October 1st. So new to the job, but not new to the IDB, not new in the role of a country representative. She has a very extensive experience and career spanning over 20 years. She is an economic development professional, but more importantly, I would say a change leader. So she puts a lot of value on getting things moving and finding new ways of working together, right? Her core competencies include strategic planning, change management, and portfolio management. And she's held positions at the IDB all over the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, also Nicaragua, and also in HQ in DC. Finally, she holds a master's in business administration and a master's of science in economics and social history from Oxford University. So please join me welcoming Karina Coburn.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Chloe. I think that my remarks will be shorter than that introduction. But thank you anyway. I think we're all getting to know each other. So this is the second time this week we've been lucky enough to host an event in this room, in this country office. I hope we're getting better at it. We had some technical difficulties for those who were here on Monday, and I expect that we're going to have a rousing discussion this morning. So first of all, let me especially welcome Minister Humphrey. We're just meeting for the first time this morning. I'm sure we'll be working together in the coming months. And I know that this was an event that you specially requested us to host. And I'm happy to say that we're able to bring it to fruition this morning. So the context of this event is that we want to explore how data and research can drive evidence-based policymaking in the Caribbean. And of course, this is a particularly important topic, particularly in a region where there have been gaps and we've been using aging data over time. The challenge in a nutshell is that even though administrative records are routinely collected and stored by various public and private entities, these records are often not digitalized and are usually disconnected from each other. So when we think about it, we realize that there's actually a hidden treasure trove of information in public bodies like ministries of education, which collect school enrollment and academic achievement records, police departments, which store arrest and conviction records. And both of those were used in a very interesting study in Trinidad and Tobago recently to look at school choice, right, Dita?
experience as well. I'll be trying to be quick. It's hard though. He's held many senior positions within the government, including Minister of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, Manager of the Child Care Board, directorships at the Bureau of Social Policy, Research and Planning, and of the Department, and the Department of Constituency Empowerment, among others. This is to highlight that he has vast experience. He's seen administrative data from inside out. So that's why we're very happy to host this event and have this conversation, because without the partnership with the government, this conversation would not even be happening, right? We also know that you have a strong tie with the University of West Indies, that you've been a part-time lecturer there. In general, his academic credentials and professional experience reflect that true passion for social activism and social commitment. And he's been deeply engaged in community initiatives, and he's deeply interested in social development, poverty reduction, community development, youth issues, elderly affairs, environmental concerns, so everything. Lastly, Minister Humphrey holds a master's degree in social policy and planning for developing countries from London School of Economics, and a master's in public administration from Harvard University. So please join me in welcoming Minister Kirk Humphrey.
Good morning, distinguished everyone. I made a few notes this morning. Don't panic, this was not to be extensive. This was actually to limit myself, because this is, as they said, something that I have been pondering on for a very, very long time. So don't be worried about the scribbles that I made this morning. But I want to thank the IDB. I want to thank the university. I think this is perhaps one of those conversations that I have been hoping that we could have in a serious way for a long time. And I say that because I recognize that in the Caribbean, we traditionally say there is a dearth of data, right? Like every conversation begins with, in the Caribbean, there is a dearth of data. And sometimes, regrettably, this is reflected in a lot of the international or regional reports where we do not see the information for the Caribbean, which is quite regrettable. And therefore, I wanted to have this conversation. As was said by Chloe, I have spent a lot of my time in research, whether in the public sector, whether at a university, or whether as a student, or whether as a minister of government. And therefore, it's a conversation I want to have. And so, it is clear that throughout government there's data. I mean, I don't think I have to say that to anybody in this room. I have had the privilege of being in a ministry, now called the Ministry of People Empowerment. It used to be the Ministry of Social Transformation, the Ministry of Social Care, where essentially we were responsible for dealing with the information pertaining to persons who are either the most vulnerable or in some other way in need of government assistance. And believe me when I say to you, there is a lot of data there. But have you been able to make that data information? Have you been able to use it? And if we ask and answer that question honestly, the answer would have to be no. So in a way, it is almost like water everywhere, or any drop to drink. And for those who would prefer a bit of Bob Marley, in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. And therefore, that is what I think we are facing really in Barbados, an abundance and yet a lack. And it's almost like, how do you reconcile what is almost a dichotomy, right? This abundance and still a lack. And I think that is what we have been called to resolve. And I thought I would want to, in my very brief comments, I will be brief, probably they gave me 10 minutes, so I won't go over my 10 minutes. This was really to limit myself. But I would want to locate this conversation where I think we ought to begin, particularly for the public service, where it relates to administrative data. And I think we have a very rich history, because of our colonial past in some ways. That's a conversation to be had another time about some of the other issues. But it gave us ministries. It gave us a system of government that we have kept, we've continued to use, even though I must say the UK is changing their system, we continue to use the system. And we have part of that legacy is this very siloed approach to everything. I am the Minister of Maritime and Blue Economy. That has been my focus. I've been moved, I'm the Minister of People Empowerment. That's my focus. And regrettably, the sharing of information that you would anticipate in one government doesn't occur. And it happens also as well at the level of the public servants. In fact, being a silo is a religion in the public service, And I say so as a former senior public servant. We hold on to the space that we have. And so sharing data becomes very, very complicated. I think the other issue that I would have seen is that there is no respect. There's no desire for data. I remember once having a conversation with a minister, whom I won't name, but at that time I was a public servant. I remember him saying to me, there's no need to do any studies, right? Like, what do you want to do a study for? I could tell you where the poor people are. And then I heard that reflected very recently by another person, this idea that you don't need to have information. You don't need to have it because everybody feels in the social sector that, everybody doesn't think they're an economist, but everybody believes that they could be a social scientist. And so there's no need for them to pursue a need to research a lot of this information. And therefore, we have to be able to look at that as well. But why do I think we need to have this conversation? I think the times demand it of us, I think we know, for example, a question was asked of me recently at another place. How do you approach in a crisis, in a climate crisis, the ex ante and ex post, the before and after planning for crisis? And I said, I don't even know we can do that anymore. We're constantly in crisis. Like we are constant. It's almost like a continuum. This idea that there's a clear entry point and a clear exit point is over. And what COVID showed us is that, for many of us, we started to panic, but COVID gave us so much data. Like, when else would we have the access to that level of information? We never had it before. And I know we thought we didn't collect data during COVID, but we did. Because we had to come up with innovative ways to reach people as opposed to these studies. And so you cannot get that kind of information outside of what we got in the ministries across government. Now we know how people respond, who needed help first, where were the areas, what did the children want? That's all there, but have we used it? The answer has to be no. So I'm saying that just in the regular course of things, we get all this data, but we're not being able to use it. And because it happens so naturally for most of us, I think it is also, there's a certain authenticity. So let me speed up. How much time is that? That's about 5 minutes? Okay, that's about 5 minutes. But the challenge, I think, with a lot of government data and administrative data generally is, well, first of all, the good thing is that it's everywhere. Like, you don't have to go looking for it. It's there, it's everywhere. But the challenge is that it's everywhere, but that in some cases it is very difficult to retrieve. In the public sector, we haven't only now recently, in a serious way, if I'm being honest, we've only recently now started looking at making things digital and digitizing. We haven't been good at that. So a lot of the data that exists is stored literally in boxes. When I used to be a tax administrator, I remember we were doing an audit, and all the data came down, and there was centipedes literally in the box. Like, it was just there. Nobody was making use of it. And so it's there, but it's difficult to retrieve. And then what we saw, as I said before, like a lot of systems don't speak to one another. In the ministry, for example, I've been in that ministry from 2002 in different ways. But the Child Care Board's collection of data is very different from the National Assistance Board, which is very different from the Disabilities Unit. So you have all these systems within one place. They do not speak to one another. And worse still, it's not that the systems don't speak, it's that the people don't speak, right? Like, people don't speak to one another. And so there's no real exchange except for the occasional case conference or whatever. So I'm just saying that there is a need for us to really look at this seriously. So the point is, if we have the data but we're not using it, then, it's pretty much useless. And we could do a little bit better. So we need to be able to use it because it's there, it's available. For example, now the government is working on designing a number of policies. We did the elderly policy and legislation, the disability policy and legislation, the child policy, and the accompanying legislation, the gender policy, all these things. And this requires a lot of information, but most of that information came from their studies and some primary research. I just felt that there could have been use of some of the data that we had. And it made me reflect, too, that a lot of the work we do a lot of work with IDB. I'm very, very thankful to the IDB. Truthfully, whether it was in maritime and blue economy or in this ministry, the IDB has been a wonderful partner to the government and a fantastic partner to the Ministry of People Empowerment. And so a lot of the things that we have as a result of the relationship with some of the multilaterals, particularly the IDB. But I think about the relationship with the university, for example. The university helped us with most of these projects in many ways. But my challenge is that I feel we go to the university. We tell the university what we want, and they give it to us. And so in a way, it seems to me that the government is shaping what the university does, and that the reverse should be even more true. That the university should be shaping what the government does. So that the university should be driving our agenda, as opposed to us driving the university's agenda, which seems to me to be the reality where I stand as a minister. These should be the new exciting areas come out of the university. Hey, government, are you doing these things? But I feel like that it goes, we're doing these things. Hey, could you help us with these things? And I think that has to be, we have to reflect on that relationship in a very serious way as we attempt to develop new knowledge, which is what universities do as we move forward. So lastly, I would say I think we have to use the data that's available. It's available, it's timely, it doesn't cost as much. We have to do what's necessary to keep it confidential, de-identify persons so that they don't feel that their information is at risk, create that legal framework that allows us to do it safely as we go forward. And then, as I wouldn't be myself if I did not say that data is not just data. In many cases, these are people, right? This is their life. This is what they depend on. This is when they come to the government, they're coming for a reason. They're not just a number. And we have to reflect on the fact that this is real change in the lives of ordinary people if we do it right. And again, I'm happy to be able to witness this conversation, to be part of the conversation, but I'm hopeful that we can make very serious progress on these very serious issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And you touched on a point that is very important, is this marriage between academia and the government and how you can help each other, right? And that's why we have here Professor Clive Landis. He is the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of West Indies, Cave Hill campus. He is a distinguished academic and researcher who has made significant contributions to the University of West Indies. And he's been in that institution for over 20 years and has served in multiple capacities. And just to name a few, Professor Landis has been deputy principal at the Cave Hill campus, University Pro's vice chancellor for undergrad studies, chair of the UWI, Zika, and COVID-19 task forces, and professor in cardiovascular research. His research interests are a little bit far away from. No, okay, I'll just say inflammation, the resolution of inflammation and vascular diseases. So very far away from what economists do, but I'm sure Professor Landis values highly the use of data. Maybe not administrative data for his own research and interest, but data after all, right? Without data, you cannot validate theories and get to interesting findings, right? He's published over 150 scientific papers and provided many conference presentations. And what I found very interesting is with the role that he has right now, he prioritizes these student-centered approaches, and also he's maintaining an impressive record in teaching, research, and outreach. And what's very important for today's conversation, he's also fostered collaborations in public health and also laboratory research. He holds a PhD in immunology and a Master of Science degree in microbiology from Loyola University of Chicago. And please join me in welcoming Professor Clive Landis.
Thank you very much for that very generously proportioned introduction. I'm just hoping that doesn't come off my time. So I've heard what you have said, Minister Humphreys, and I want to, I'll actually be mentioning one PhD student in my remarks. I actually wasn't going to identify her by name, but I will do so now. I want to put it to you that the university is very open and very willing to engage civil servants where they continue to do their day-to-day job and never leave their civil service, and they research what they're doing and then get a PhD. So the example from which I will use today is Sonji Branch, who she gained her PhD under my supervision in the government's HIV laboratory, and she's now head of the national laboratory, and she is the most honourable Sonji Branch. So you can imagine how proud I am. And then Angela Davis, very interesting as well. She just graduated a few weeks ago with her PhD from the Faculty of Social Sciences, and her research was on violence in our society. Could not be more relevant. And she is a civil servant who never left her job while she was doing her PhD in the Barbados Probation Service. So I am letting it be known to any ministry that, you know, bright civil servants who have a desire to engage with their data, with their environment, we will very happily take them on in what's known as a part-time PhD. All that means is that you can take longer and you stay where you are. You don't have to, as previously in the old days, you used to have to stop what you were doing, come and do a PhD and then go back. You don't have to do that anymore. All right. I am very pleased that the University of the West Indies Cave campus has partnered with the Inter-American Development Bank for this important workshop, themed Data and Research to Policies that Improve Lives in the Caribbean. I welcome any initiative that brings together the university and the administrative sections of government to help improve lives of Caribbean people, whom we both serve. I am absolutely convinced that once we engage with our own data, then it becomes inevitable to make better decisions for the benefit of our societies. Evidence-based policymaking is a topic very close to the heart of any good researcher. I describe it as the process whereby routine administrative data is converted through objective analysis into metaphorical gold dust for decision makers, with members of society being the ultimate beneficiaries. But if we are to convince members of the public or those persons in our civil service who are collecting the administrative data of the value of such an analytical approach, then we need to ditch some of the jargon and start speaking in plain language. So I will give a concrete example to illustrate my point. Around 15 years ago, I was asked to take on the running of the government's national HIV laboratory until such a time as one of its rising young staff members, Sonji Branch, could gain the necessary qualifications to take on the substantive role herself. What I found upon my arrival at this government laboratory was a rich collection of some 17,000 data points on the HIV viral loads in blood samples collected over many years. This data had been used to inform individual care of patients, it's administrative data, in order to adjust and optimize treatment using antiretroviral drugs according to availability and best practice. But the transformative moment for the national HIV program came when the UWI and the Ministry of Health, and we co-published all of this, collaborated to analyze this data collective, all 17,000 data points, and publish it in a leading journal. And we made some startling observations. We realized, firstly, that our 10-year retrospective analysis was only the second ever country-level analysis of HIV virus expression after the United States of America. And when we compared our achievement as a country in suppressing HIV virus among our clients in Barbados, it became apparent that we were as effective as the USA. This gave an enormous boost to the morale of the clinic and ministry staff, and indeed healthcare staff across the wider Caribbean region. It said to everyone administering HIV care, we can do this. In short order, we published further research demonstrating effective virus suppression in OECS countries that were referring their laboratory samples to us in Barbados, while other countries across the Caribbean region began routinely analyzing and reporting HIV virus suppression across their clinics and ministries. It was almost a competition for best viral suppression at a population level. The data was openly shared and shared at annual workshops. So Caribbean countries, all Caribbean countries at annual workshop were sharing this suppression of HIV data, HIV viral load data, and best practices in HIV care across the Caribbean flourished. At around the same time, in 2014, the global UNAIDS program made data-driven virus suppression the cornerstone of the global HIV eradication effort. But the Caribbean was already ahead of the curve at that point, and it remains a source of enormous pride that 7 of the first 10 countries to be certified by the World Health Organization to have eliminated mother-to-child transmission of HIV were from the Caribbean. The evidence has ultimately shown that every country which has been able to achieve suppression of HIV in the bodies of persons living with HIV had also stemmed virus transmission from one person to another, including from infected mothers to their children who remained HIV-free, and the epidemic started gradually coming under control. There can be no doubt that here is a tangible example of today's panel discussion, from data and research to policies that improve the lives in the Caribbean. I am very pleased that some of our best researchers at the UWITV campus are represented on the panel today to demonstrate how data collected across a range of fields can inform policymaking, from the setting of the minimum wage to water pricing and the benefits of universal access to childcare. So please do enjoy the rest of the panel and presentations from our UE researchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for it's very, I am very impressed with the research you carried, and it especially shows the part of improving lives, right? And what Minister was saying about these are people. Administrative data is about individuals. It's not a number, it's not a combination of a number of letters. We're talking about people, we're talking about saving lives. So thank you very much for your remarks. So now we're gonna go, yes. We're gonna move to the second part of today's seminar. So I welcome Dieter, Winston, and Mahalia. If you can please join us in the couches. And yeah. Okay. So the three of them are going to showcase examples on how they have used administrative data and the findings that they've come up with, right? So we're going to start with Dieter, or man. Sorry, right here. I have you right here. My many pages of bios. I'll do it very fast. He is the principal research economist at the IDB, so our colleague, and he's been truly a champion within the IDB on working with data in the Caribbean, not Latin America, but with a particular focus on the Caribbean. In his past life, he's also led research in Europe, Africa, the US, so very ample experience. And also he's interested in many topics, including technology adoption, education, health, social protection, private sector productivity, institutional design, crime, migration, remittances, impacts of climate change. So we're always sitting and wondering, what's Dieter going to do next? Because he's covered everything. And he has published in many leading international peer-reviewed journals, and he holds a BA in business management and economics from the University of Lima in Peru, where he's from, and also master's in finance from the University of Durham, and a PhD and master's in economics from the University of Maryland College Park. So with that, I pass it to you. You have the clicker. This one? Oh, that one. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Can you listen to me? Thank you so much. I'm very excited and pleased of being here in this moment that we have been planning for some time. Minister Mahalaya, Minister, Professor Clips. And I couldn't agree more with all what has been said. And I think I will start in a very positive and optimistic mode, because although we are in the Caribbean starting, and there have been very good uses of administrative data, there's much more to do. But today, I think we're going to present some demonstration studies that show how useful this could be. You know, I mean, also following all the examples of so relevant, so inspiring of Professor Clips, and this is trying to do something along the same vein, more focus on social issues. Right? So to start with, I would like to, well, this has been already said, but we highlight the importance of administrative records, right? So these are routinely collected every day as we speak, and they are stored. So in terms of a cost of collecting these records, the cost is already there. It's a sunk cost, okay? Okay, so they are there. And there are many examples, as Karin also mentioned. You know, educational records, police records, immigration records, civil registry, national insurance schemes records, and so forth. The data is there. However, typically, two things that has been said also. Either we have limited digitalization, and in addition, we have limited interoperability between these records. So why this matters? Here, an example, right? Of what we usually see or have. Many records stored in different agencies and totally disconnected, right? This is an example that could be, that are applicable for the Caribbean, right? We can have secondary entrance assessments, CSEC records, CAPE records, and you can imagine tertiary education records, NIH records, health centers that provide diagnosis and disability certifications, civil registry, which store a lot of information in terms of fertility, marriages, immigration services that store all the information of people moving in and out of the country, police records, and so on, right? And this is more or less the typical map that we observe, right? Each box in their own entity, and used to monitor each of the activity. So this is a missed opportunity, and I will start with two examples. Imagine there could be interoperability, right, between health centers and the NIS, for example. As we know, health centers should certify, for example, disabilities, and the NIS will provide disability compensations. So what is the current reality? And maybe someone here in the room may have experienced it. If you want to claim some disability compensation from the NIS, what you have to do? You need to go first to health center, certify the disability, get the paper, right? Then travel to the NIS, show your paper, the AM disabled, and apply for the benefit. If we quantify the time, resources, and all the burden that we're placing on people, it shouldn't be like that. If you had all of these records interconnected, yeah, you only need to go, for example, to the health center, get certified the disability, and if all of this is interoperable, you just go to your home and wait for that disability benefit to be deposited in your bank account, right? Clear example of how public service could be improved just with this type of technology. Another example, and we were discussing this on Monday when we launched here the book of private sector. In terms of the labor markets in the Caribbean, we see what we call a skills mismatch. There's an over demand in the private sector for high skilled people and an undersupply, right? And sometimes the skills that are demanded in the private sector are not exactly those who are being pursued by students in higher education. Right? And this in part is due to a problem of asymmetric information. Imagine a student who is going out of secondary school and I need to make a choice of what to study, right? How can I guide that decision? That's an investment decision of the side of the student. It's an investment decision because you expect some return. And to make that investment, of course, anybody would like to see what is the expected return of that investment. But today, a student is blind. However, this could be partially solved by providing information. And how can we provide that information? As many other countries have done, for example, in Latin America, clear examples like Chile, Colombia, Peru, exploiting administrative data. Imagine you have NIS data, which stores and collects the contributions to the NIS, but at the same time, it's also storing the earnings of people. Imagine you could match this with tertiary education institutions that can say, okay, this person, he studied this major, right? And I have the average earnings of this person. You could imagine of providing general information of the average expected earnings by each major and by each education institution. And that's what is being done, for example, today in countries like Chile, Colombia, Peru. This is all administrative data. You don't need to invest a cent in getting this data. It's just an issue of merging it, processing it, and making available in a general way, without compromising any confidentiality. And that has been shown to reduce significantly the skills mismatch in the labor market, because now people can observe what are those career choices with higher expected return, which means that they are in low supply in the labor market, and this skills mismatch could be resolved. Right? So these are two clear examples on how administrative data could be put at the use of improving public services and also reducing market failures, right? Like in this case, asymmetric information. Very good. So now I'm gonna go to specific examples. So what we're gonna do today, we're gonna present 3 specific examples of how this type of data has been used and is being used in improving lives of people. I will start talking about how this type of data in the Caribbean is being used to improve human capital. And specifically, I will focus on the topic of school value added, which I explain in the next slides. Then my colleague Winston here will speak about modeling changes in water prices. And then colleague Mahlaya will speak about the potential benefits of universal access to childcare. So this is kind of the agenda for now. I will start with the first topic, improving human capital. And first, I would like to make clear a concept that I will come again and again during my presentation, which is the concept of value added, okay? Value added, also a synonym of it would be effectiveness or a cause-effect relation between a treatment and some outcome. And in this case, I'm going to focus on school. So we are going to focus here as, let's say, the intervention going to some specific school. What is the relevant measure to determine whether a school is effective, is adding value or not? To do this, basically here schematically, if we see in the left part, imagine you have some measure of ability, in this case, before going to secondary school. So what you need to have in order to estimate what value a school is adding, you will need to have in a moment, here I call pre-test in year 1, measure of ability of 2 students that before going to secondary school were exactly the same. So 2 twins, okay? Then imagine you allocate 1 twin to school A and the other twin to school B with exactly the same initial ability and so forth. And then you follow them and you take a measure of outcomes, right? In this case, a test, but could be any other outcome, as I will show later, after you go through the secondary school. In this case, this is the case that where I'm going to show. And the difference in this outcome would be the value added. Why? Because you're comparing apples to apples, right, who were exactly the same before going to secondary school, and that difference would be what value school A added with respect to school B. Of course, if there's no difference, it means that both schools have added the same value. But if there's a difference between these 2 otherwise identical individuals before going to school, and you saw the difference after school, that's the value added. Okay? So I want to fix this concept because around this concept, I will build my presentation. Okay? Okay. So issue 1. This type of measure is typically difficult to estimate. Why? Because it's very difficult to find these 2 comparable twins that just differ in terms of where they went. So that's, in general, a difficulty of identification across the board. The second issue even if it was possible to estimate this value added, what we usually do is take as outcomes test scores, right? You see a person who scores very similar before going to school, and then you take as a measure of effectiveness of the school the test score after going to school. Could be, in the Caribbean case, the CSEC outcome, for example, one outcome, right? Okay. What is happening is that we usually measure the effectiveness of school with test scores. Why? Because we assume that if a school is adding value in terms of academics, it also should be adding value in terms of longer-term productivity, which is what we actually want to affect when you go through a human capital intervention, in this case, a school. But this is an assumption that we often take for granted, and that, curiously, has never been shown rigorously until recent. Okay? So the main knowledge gap that I'm going to speak about now is basically this. The main question is if the value added measured with academic outcome is aligned with the value added of a school in terms of other non-academic and long-run outcomes that determine adult productivity. Right? That's the main question. And how do we solve it? First, of course, we need to solve the issue of identification, which is identifying these two otherwise identical persons with the only difference that one person went to school A, the other person went to school B, so that we can measure this difference after the school experience and to calculate the value added. It's not just comparing all kids who went to school A versus all kids who went to school B, because that will be comparing like apples and oranges, right? We need to identify apples to apples with the only difference, one apple went to school A, the other went to school B. That's extremely difficult to find at the general level in a systemic way. There has been some trials where you can influence where kids go and randomize across schools, but that's very difficult to do at a systemic level, okay? Or to find. And that's in part the reason why this type of question had never been answered before. Because even in countries like, for example, Scandinavian countries, where you have rich administrative data, where you can follow people, since they are in pregnancy until they die, you don't have this type of institutional setting to identify these two twins who went to school A or B. The good news is that in the Caribbean, also as Professor Cliff was saying, we have a unique context where this question could be solved. And I'm going to speak specifically about Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago are one of the two countries in the world who were the earliest adopters of what Milton Friedman proposed in 1955 in terms of a school choice system, which is a school choice system that here we have for secondary schools, also in Trinidad and Tobago, also in Jamaica, for example, more recently, right? Which, as you all know, students are allocated to secondary schools based on the preferences expressed by parents and on a common examination taken at the end of primary school, okay? This school choice system was proposed by Milton Friedman in 1955, and theoretically, he proposed that this system would be more efficient than, for example, a zoning system, which we have in most areas in the US, right? Where you go to the school, where you live, right? In terms of a boundary, and that's it. So there's no choice. Basically, you go to school, you will live, right? But it was a theoretical proposition. Interestingly, the number of countries across time who have been migrating to this system has exploded recently. You see here, this is the number of countries and regions within countries who have now been adopting this system. I mean, the same system and allocation algorithm that you have here in Barbados since 1956, and in Trinidad and Tobago as well, right? As you see, Milton Friedman proposed this model in 1955, and Caribbean countries adopted in 1956. And why this has exploded through time? Because relatively recent, very serious research pioneered by, for example, recent Nobel Prize Professor Joshua Angris at the MIT, have shown empirically that this system is much more efficient, more equitable, and actually impact positively the outcomes of students. And I'm speaking about research published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, I mean, the top one. So after this evidence, more and more countries, and even in the US, New York City, Chicago, public school systems, North Carolina, all of them are actually adopting the system that you have here since 1956. But recently, 5, almost 10 years. What this brings here is that when I started working in the Caribbean, 10 years ago, actually, and I discovered there's a huge context for learning, because these systems are the mode today. These are the latest thing that is being adopted now. And here we have it like for more than 60 years. So it's a unique context where we can inform the long-term effects of this type of this system, which is now being adopted, and the trend is that it will continue to be adopted by many countries and so forth. Okay? So, this is where we started. Okay? I see some... But this is the reality. Okay? So, great. So, and what is the advantage of this system? That this context offers the possibility of precisely identifying these two twins who were exactly the same before going to secondary school, but who, because of the algorithm, one ended in school A or school B. As you well know, this system generates a specific cutoff score in this case, right? And given the available seats at each school, that there is a kid who was like the last admitted to school A, right? Let's say to his or her first preference, right? So the seats are filled. And therefore, the next scoring kids will need to go to the second preference. So, and this is like, here is normalized at the 0 point in the x-axis. Right? So this is the score relative to the cutoff. So you see here, where I highlight in red, these two otherwise almost identical individuals who score just a difference of 0.0001, you know, in the BSSE in this case, or the SCA in Trinidad, or the GSAT in Jamaica. So they are showing almost the same level of ability before going to secondary school, but that makes a huge difference on which school you go. So you have this pair of people, and there are thousands of these pairs of people across all the years, very similar or exactly the same before going to secondary school, but one went to school A, one went to school B. So we have the context where we can potentially have these comparable individuals. And if we can follow these individuals over time on their outcomes, calculate the value added of each school, right? Using these comparable individuals. Okay. So we have a great context, right? We can learn from this system long term, but we need data, right? To track these individuals over time and be able to estimate this value added. And that was the big challenge, right? We need that data. And as has been said by the minister about Professor Cliffs, this data exists, but sometimes we don't know it exists. And actually, it existed, as Minister Humphrey said, in many cases on paper, right? But it was there. It was in the drawers, you know, forgotten. And what we did, you know, also Ricardo is here. He was working with us. We actually started trying to speak with the agencies and do a digitalization process. So this paper-based data, we digitalized, right? And then we got to having the appropriate digitalized databases to start exploring these issues. And we have explored these issues in Barbados and in Trinidad and Tobago. I will have to say that in in the results that I will present now, a key partner was my esteemed colleague, Professor Kirabo Jackson. I don't know if you know him. He's a professor of economics at Northwestern University, but of Caribbean origins. His father was the first director of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, Dr. Clement Jackson, and his mother is from Trinidad and Tobago. And so when I arrived to the Caribbean, I didn't know anything about the Caribbean, but I saw one of his papers and I called him. I said, look, let's do things together. And we start working together. He has, until recently, been one of the personal economic advisors of the US president. And that's another example of how influencer Caribbean people could be, in any area. And it has been one of the greatest experiences working with Caribbean people, with Kirabo, to try to bring together this type of evidence that I will show is actually now shaping evidence-based policies. Okay, so the first example where we were able to match some of this administrative data is here in Barbados. So basically, we were to digitalize historical records of the BSSE and match it at the individual level with CSEC, CAPE, and also with surveys, with the 2016 Survey of Living Conditions and with a 2020 phone survey that we did over the same sample of the 2016 living conditions during the COVID. And what I will show here is one of the main findings. So the first graph in the top left, you have already seen. That's the difference of where you went to school. So that difference, if you look at the outcomes, will be the value added of an average. So we see, and this is a paper that we published in the Journal of Human Resources with Kirabo. What we document here is that there was no average value added in academics, for example, in CSEC outcomes, that the probability of obtaining the 5 CSEC passes, including English and math. But then when you follow these people over the long term, you start seeing some value added in terms of CAPE associate degree, and also in long-term earnings and health status captured in the 2016 living conditions. So first message here is that although we may not see value added in academics, we do see over the same people and over time value added in other long-run outcomes. So this is a first indication that the assumption that academic value added should be aligned with longer-term outcomes might not be holding, okay? Then we also look at the pandemic, and this is particular for women. We also see that women who went to better schools or more preferred schools acquire more years of education, this is the left, and the right, this is how this reduced significantly the probability of losing a job during the pandemic, okay? So more education, lower probability of losing a job. And then we go to Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago, as Karina was saying, we were able to match different administrative level data. So this is not survey data. This is administrative level data covering the full population of the country, matching the primary school exam with the CSEC, CAPE, but also with the full civil registry, with the police records, and with the National Insurance Board, so the equivalent of NIS here, right? So we have, for each individual, starting since the 80s, we can track all of their outcomes in terms of academics, but also, for example, in terms of the probability of being arrested, criminal activity, the fertility, and the long-term employment outcomes, okay? So what we do here is that for each school, because here we have full population data, for each school, we calculate the value added along all of these dimensions. So teen pregnancies, teen arrest, adult labor market employment, and academics. What I'm showing here, each point here is the value added of one school, each school in the country, right? In the x-axis is the value added in CSEC outcomes, right? Passing the CSEC 5 passes, English and math. And in the y-axis is the value added of the schools in other important non-academic outcomes. Like, for example, teen pregnancies, arrests, or formal employment when adult. If the assumption that academic value added should be predictive of non-academic value added was true, what we should observe here should be these dots aligned across the 45-degree line, and the correlation close to 1. What we document, and this was published in one of the top 5 journals in economic sciences, the Review of Economic Studies, actually edited in London School of Economics and published by the Oxford University Press, with feedback for example, recent Nobel Prize Joshua Angrist, and this paper is being highly influential. What we document here for the first time is that basically the correlation is almost 0. What this means, that there are schools, that the one that I'm highlighting here, that they behave as expected. So they provide high academic value added, high non-academic value added. Great. But there are other schools, that the ones I'm highlighting here, that are low academic value added, that we will deem as bad schools. I don't know when I want to go there. Right? But they are actually improving a lot non-academic outcomes that are very important, even employment in adulthood. So while we provide evidence, this is a causal value-added estimate, great. What is the message here is that these schools have to be doing something. I don't know what they are doing. Is it the style of the principal, how they are allocated students across class, what the extracurricular activities are? I don't know. And that is the very important thing to know, to see what effective practice we can learn from the local context to improve the outcomes for everybody. And that's what we're doing here. So this motivated a current soon-to-be approved loan of IDB in Trinidad and Tobago, where we're actually collecting huge amount of information from each school about this. What the schools are doing, what are the extracurricular activities, what is the instruction style they're doing. We're taking recordings of the classes to see the style of the principals, the education of the teachers. So we're documenting all what the schools are doing. To why? To then, with artificial intelligence, see what of these practices are driving more the academic and the non-academic value added, with the objective of identifying those effective practices that are improving outcomes, and then applying them to other schools to test their effectiveness. And this is the upcoming IDB operation in Trinidad and Tobago that we are working. And Karine is there because she was the country representative when we started planning this loan. It's about to be approved. So I'm very excited about this, and I think it's an example on how we can actually use high-level research to inform policies effectively. And this could be done here in Barbados as well. It's a matter of, as Minister Humphrey said, be strategic, identify what records are there, and use them for the benefit of people. So with this, I finish, and thank you very much. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Dieter, for the presentation. And something that you didn't mention, that it's also important, is that gathering all this information helps parents inform their decision on where to send their kids to school, right? Because we all know that not all kids are the same, and some kids are more inclined into exercising or sports versus academic outcomes, or they're not that interested in academic outcomes. As a parent, we always want them to go to the university, get a master's, but not all kids want that. And it's a way of informing what other schools can be a good fit for your kids. So that's
actually what Chloe has mentioned is, for the sake of time, what I have actually presented here is half of the paper. The paper is entitled, "What is a good school?" So that's what I have presented here. And can parents tell? So the second part of the paper is exploring the parental preferences and see how parents of kids of different abilities choose the schools, whether they privilege more academics or non-academics, and so forth. So I invite you to read the paper. We will share the paper. It's publicly available, and you can find the answers there. And we can also share a video that we actually did, going to actual schools that we found were very effective across all dimensions, and kind of seeing what they're doing and so forth.
Okay, so it was a teaser, so you actually download his paper. with that, we're going to move to Professor Winston Moore. He is the deputy principal of the UWI Cave Hill campus. He's an economist. He's recognized both in Barbados, Caribbean, but also internationally. And he's taken impactful research, and he's done a great job at building these bridges between academics and the private sector. And also, he's been a very active public commentator on issues related to national development in Barbados. And his research interests include green economy, private sector development, and the economic impact of climate change on tourism. And over his career, he has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles, books, book chapters, so very, very productive. And since joining the university almost 20 years ago as well, he has taken a great deal of leadership positions, such as the head of the Department of the Economics. And prior to his life at UWI, he was at the Central Bank of Barbados. And he earned his bachelor's of science in economics from the University of West Indies in the Cave Hill campus, a master's of science in economics from the University of Warwick, and a PhD in economics from the University of Surrey. Welcome, Winston.
Thank you very much. So I decided for this morning to go into my batch of papers to look at a relatively interesting question that I was asked to resolve. So a couple of colleagues came to me and they asked, can I tell them what would be the rate of increase in water tariffs that would allow the Barbados Water Authority to close the revenue gap, or close that gap in terms of between revenue and costs, but not impact on the social fabric of Barbados. So that was the basis of this paper, that really simple question. So we have some really great data coming from your ministry, Minister Humphrey. We have the poverty data. And we've been collecting poverty data in Barbados now for a number of years. You can see some interesting changes in poverty across time from various areas. One of the things that I always point out to persons is that poverty is still an issue in Barbados. Where you have a country, when you have a high-income country where poverty is more than 10-15% in some areas of Barbados, it means that you still have an issue of poverty. So you have areas where you have a high level of income, but you also have persons where that are also maybe just below the poverty line or significantly below the poverty line. And in some areas, you've actually seen an increase in the rate of poverty. So if you look at the rate of poverty between 2010 and 2016, there are some parishes where you're seeing a significant increase in poverty, say, for example, like St. John, but in other areas where you're seeing a reduction in poverty, like St. James. So it sort of identifies areas where you should focus on your poverty alleviation just utilizing this data. Now, we also have data on customer bills from the Barbados Water Authority. So the Barbados Water Authority has data from every single individual, every single household in Barbados on how much they pay for water on a monthly basis. One of the things that you would see from I know it's a very small chart, my apologies, but one of the things you will see is that the average water bill across Barbados is relatively the same. So those boxes indicate that most of us pay around like $40, $50 per month, the average Barbadian. But then there are other households that pay significantly more. Those are the outliers that I also provided in this chart as well. So what I did in this study is that I combined the data from the Barbados Water Authority at the household level with the data from the poverty surveys. So now what I could do is do some very simple simulations. I can say, what would happen to poverty if I increase water tariffs by 10%? I can see the impact on poverty in Barbados. And I could therefore use that to say, what would be the ideal rate of change in water tariffs that would minimize the impact on poverty in Barbados. This is just another water bill chart, but this is the main one that I wanted to show. for most Barbadians, the water bill is the lowest bill that you would have in your portfolio bills. So you, yeah, which is unfortunate because water is also the one that is obviously one of those things that we really can't live without. I always tell persons I would probably prefer to have my electricity off rather than my water off. I really can't live without my water. But water tends to be really low in terms of your water bill. So I asked the very simple question: what rate of tariff would can I have that would maintain the water tariffs at that very low level? So if I look at maybe a 0% change, a 5% change, or maybe a 10% change in water tariffs, I would be able to see what proportion of households will still maintain that their water bill is the lowest bill out of all of the bills that they have to pay. And you can see that that pink line shows you that if we were to increase water tariffs by the maximum amount considered, that would significantly change the demographic for most Barbadian households, where you would actually see that those households would now have the water tariff being the highest one for those households. And that's the same across all of the parishes within Barbados. So it therefore suggests that maybe you might want to consider a lower tariff than the maximum one that I considered. So that was the recommendation in the study coming out of sort of merging those two databases together. Then the other database that I looked at was the tariff database that we have in Barbados. So we have a large information on data on tariffs in Barbados, and we apply tariffs to various types of food. And we have been trying to encourage persons to eat a lot more healthy. So we have a tax on sugar sweetened beverages in Barbados. And I asked a very simple question: what is the average rate of tariff on relatively healthy foods? So healthy foods are foods that have a very low sugar content, very low carbohydrate level. What is the average rate of tariffs on those type of foods? And the reason for that is we're trying to encourage persons to be a lot more healthy in terms of the foods that they consume. And it should have some beneficial effects on the health outcomes that we have in Barbados as well. And when you crunch the numbers, you actually found something really interesting. On average, unhealthy foods tend to have a higher rate of tariff compared to healthy foods, which is a little bit strange that you would be taxing your unhealthy foods so much higher than your healthy foods. In fact, the maximum tariff goes all the way. Opposite. Sorry, my apologies. So my apologies. Yeah, the tax on healthy foods was actually a little bit higher than it is for unhealthy foods. They didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So it is actually strange that you'll be taxing your healthy foods so much higher than you taxing your unhealthy foods, and you would actually want the opposite within your country. You want to have your healthy foods having a lower rate of tariff than your healthy foods. And one of the reasons why this is in place is that we have been trying to protect our manufacturing industry in Barbados for a number of years, our agro-processing industries. So in order to protect those entities, we therefore put a higher tariff on farmers, on imported farm products. We've put a higher tariff on agro-processed products as well. And therefore, that's why you see that the tax on healthy foods tends to be a little bit higher. So what we need to do is maybe do a little bit of have a conversation with our farmers, have a conversation with manufacturing, to see how they can actually produce a lot more of the foods that we need in Barbados. Because if we can get them to produce a lot more of the foods that we need in Barbados, then this doesn't really matter. But it matters at the moment because we have such a high import content for food in Barbados. So just utilizing data that already exists, you can come to a very simple, interesting conclusion about how we tax food in Barbados and what we should be doing in the future. So I'm going to end here. and allow my head of department, Mahalia Jackman, to present.
Thank you very much. And what I really liked about your presentation is that it's something very tangible, right? We all go to the supermarket. We all face the choice of what we're going to eat, and we all pay water bills. So it's something very tangible, and actually the link with what the government can do is right there, right? The government is the one that is deciding on how to implement a tariff schedule, and is also deciding on what to charge for water, right, in a sense. So it's right there, the link. Let's look at the data, and some policies that firsthand they may make sense, or at least for some groups, like the one you were mentioning about protecting nascent industries in the island. Then sometimes you forget about the initial intention, and then you start putting these widespread tariffs without thinking, without looking at the data, and without looking at the impact. So thank you for your presentation. Last but not least, we have Dr. Mahalia Jackman. She is, as Winston said, the head of the economics department at the University of West Indies in the Cave Hill campus, which is the job Winston we're used to have. I also see the tie that you both were at the central bank, so no pressure, Mahalia, for your future. But overall, she has extensive experience as a research and policy economist, and her topics, or the topics that she's interested in, are macroeconomic issues for small island development states. And also, she's done a lot of work on sexual prejudice and gender equality in the labor market. And sorry, I got lost here. And I'm just going to go to your degree. Sorry, Michael, got lost in my notes. But if you want to add some of your interests. Okay. So she holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of West Indies, and also a master's in economics and econometrics from the University of Southampton, and a PhD in applied social research from the University of Manchester in the UK. Welcome.
Okay, I was thinking usually you save the best for last, but then I listened to the presentations and I realized that might not be the case. But the good thing, going after people who did a really good job of selling administrative data, I don't have to do much. I just have to not mess it up. So here we go. So today I'm going to be doing a brief snapshot of a study that I was involved in. That study was funded by the UN Women and the Joint Sustainable Development Goal Fund, and that is called Making a Case for Investment in Universal Childcare in Barbados. And a shameless plug, this is publicly available on the UN website, as well as the Joint SDG Fund website. So have fun reading the 60, 70-page document. But today we're going to pull out just certain bits of it. So the whole entire point was to try to add to policy debates about universal access for childcare in Barbados. We're going to look at the potential benefits and, the effects. Because if you're trying to get the government to spend money, no offense, especially when there's like tight fiscal space, you have to have a proper argument. So we're looking at the effects and the benefits, and we're looking at it without, breaking the bank. So we focus on age 0 to 3, and y'all should know why we will focus on 0 to 3. We have compulsory schooling at the age of 5, so you have really high enrollment rates for 5 and over, and then it's free education, and the pre-primary schools, lots of public schools there, so that 4-year-olds and stuff, they're fine. But then when you get to the 0 to 3, those are the one important. So now so before we go, when people talk about universal access, right, the first thing they think about is everyone being enrolled in a daycare center. That's not what we mean here. We're taking the definition from Binet 2008, who said, look, people who want to have their kids enrolled in the center can. That's all it is. You want the access, you can get the access. So let me just point out the challenges. Now, when I was first asked to work on this, I was really excited, get into some real research, not just what we do in the, what are called our glass towers, and publish it in journals. And then I started to do some thinking about, how I'm actually going to do this. And after the meltdown, and realizing that, I might make the Department of Economics shame because I can't figure out, there's so little data available. You start thinking about, okay, what data do you have? Stop worrying about what you don't have. Let's focus on what you actually have. So then we realize, there is some decent data out there once you call around and find out that it does exist. So we took some internal reports from the Child Care Board, which oversees, the child care services in Barbados. We got some more from them. They actually collect data on private centers. So we got some of that information. Lucky for us, that was in Excel and Word, which was great. And then I'm not going to talk a lot about what we did with the process applications. We did that for something else, and you can read the study if you want. But then we had to do a sample and get data on the process applications, and those were in carbon copies. So not even the application, the back of the thing with the carbon copy, right? So my poor research assistant had to do that, and I wasn't doing it. So then, we took that data and then we merged it with some data at the household and individual levels. You have the census data, you have the survey of living conditions. We took some UN national accounts data. We took the parliamentary estimates. Again, another section of the study, we did some focus groups and interviews. And let me just point out, those focus groups and interviews give us a lot of information about the actual public daycare. It's actually, people think they just go for the price, which you'll see is much cheaper. It's actually not that. They have a really good program, and people are aware that it's a good program. So, it's pretty good. It's really good. I mean, if I could ever afford a child, I'll send them there. So, and then we took estimates from other studies to get the long-term benefits of actually universal care. So, let's talk about the problem. 0 to 3-year-olds. So if we're saying you want to have public investment to actually increase childcare services in Barbados, then we have to look at what is actually there first, right? That makes sense. So we said, okay, if we only had public services, how much 0 to 3-year-olds will we be able to handle? And currently, the capacity that public entities could only handle, it's less than 10% of 0 to 3-year-olds in Barbados. And then we took a look at the actual demand. So you have so every public daycare center in Barbados operates at full capacity. And then you have a wait list. And in some years, the wait list is like 3 to 4 times more than the capacity. So several persons are waiting for a slot in the public daycare services. So then let's talk about the private sector, right? And the private sector, then you have a situation, there are way more spaces, like roughly at the time of the study, because we did this in COVID, imagine how much fun that was. So our data stopped at 2019. So you have roughly, at that time, about 4,000 or something spaces in the private sector, compared 1,000 or something in the public sector. But you have this case of excess supply. So you have, most of them are not filled to capacity. Actually, the cheaper ones are filled to capacity, but most of them aren't. So and the obvious thing will be, one of the obvious things will be price. You're paying $20 per week for the public services, and that includes meals. I mean, this is amazing. And they actually have an educational program, like I said, it's pretty good. In the private sector, you're paying roughly $238 to $850 per month. And I've heard that since COVID, prices went up. $850, that's some people's rent. Lucky you, not mine. But yeah, so that's pretty high, right? Imagine paying $850 for one child. And sometimes that price doesn't even include food. I'm like, not me. So private care is obviously going to be unaffordable for most households. So we took an index. It came from the U.S. Department of Human Health and Services, and they said, look, childcare is affordable if it is at most 7% of the household income. So what we did was that we created our own affordability index. We took the average, well, it's not really that original, but anyway, we took the average price in the private sector, and then we used the living conditions survey to get the total household income for households with children under 4. So you have the all households, which is in the light blue, and the dark blue is households of single parents. So imagine you are in the lowest income household, and if you can get a place in the public sector, you could end up spending somewhat between 28 to 31% of your income for one child, right? So the only persons who can afford it are, the higher income households, like, So, and probably, so that clearly says, hey, look, if I don't have enough capacity in the public sector, and then the private sector is expensive, you have a problem. And the only way to deal with that problem is you have to have some sort of intervention in the market. So if you're going to say there has to be intervention, then let's talk about how much they actually are spending. So based on the data we had at 2019, it was 0.5% of the expenditure was allocated, or at least in the parliamentary estimates, for daycare centers. And in case you missed that little arrow, that little sliver, that's what it is. And by the way, just so you know, that compares to the 1.5% that was allocated for recreation, culture, and religion. Take from that what you will. So, but the key concern then, you're always going to hear, we don't have enough fiscal space for this. Okay. The thing is, when people think about the costs, people always think about the direct intervention. And when they think about the direct intervention, they think about building childcare centers. They don't think about things like renovating buildings, old buildings to make space. They don't think about probably renting commercial buildings. And they don't think about the indirect intervention, which is the government subsidizing the private care. So it's expensive, depends on which route you take. It's always going to cost money, but I guess the little ones are worth it. So, but even if your upfront costs are really high, literature would suggest that the benefits should outweigh the costs. You have improved child outcomes, especially when you have a quality service like what they have at the Child Care Board. If there's job creation, particularly in the care economy, and then the indirect or the multiplier effects that you would talk about in other sectors. You have the increased opportunities for parents to pursue employment. One of the things we noted in the focus groups was we talked to users of the public service. We talked to persons who used them previously, and then we talked to persons on the wait list. And one thing that was consistent was, well, if I couldn't get my child into childcare, I would have an issue job-wise. And there are some persons that were actively seeking jobs, but one of the issues that they were having was that they were still on the wait list, and that was a bit of an issue in finding employment. Obviously, if you're going to have increased opportunities for employment, you're going to have increased household incomes, reductions in poverty, increases in economic growth, and then, so you're spending money to establish these public care centers, but then obviously if you have increased household income and stuff, you could actually have some tax revenue. Whether or not it's enough to compensate for what you spend, two different things, but nonetheless, we'll see if that actually happens. And then obviously the policy could counter some of the gender disparities that you have, because while men nowadays are doing more and helping out more at home, we know universally women hold most of the burden. One of the most interesting things when we were going through the applications and talking to the persons at the Child Care Board, the majority of the persons who sign up the kids for daycare, the ones who are the contact, is the mother. You hardly see men, at least based on the sample. I can't generalize. But that is something, I know I should probably mention, there's a time use survey for Barbados that is probably going to be out soon from the UN. And they're also finding that obviously women would spend way more time in care services than men do. So you got to set up. So long story short, we ran a simulation. We had both the short run and the long term effects. Lots of assumptions and lots of brainstorming, but you know how economists feel about assumptions. And before going into too much, we talked first about the direct intervention where the government rents space, and that was largely because we couldn't figure out how much it would cost to actually build a center. However, if you're talking about a long run benefit, then if I'm renting commercial space, then technically I would expect that over 20 years, you might actually end up paying more than if you had just built and maintained it. So our argument is that because we're looking at both the short and the long term, the total benefits, we're actually underestimating the benefits. So that's our excuse, and we're going for it. Economists don't come for me. So the returns, if we say, okay, let's start, well, there were several scenarios that were run. I just pulled out 2 for each type of intervention. So the 2 I'm presenting here is, let's say I increase it just to meet the demand, the excess demand, those persons on the wait list. So for every dollar I spent in the total benefit short run plus long run would be $3.25 for every dollar I spend. If I go to the extreme case of universal access and said, we're going to increase it so that every person has a space, then the return is 2.85. And I see some econ students, and what do we always talk about? Well, I shouldn't ask them, but decreasing returns to scale. So that's expected, but it's still a positive benefit. Now, if you talk about the indirect intervention, we did a whole bunch of scenarios there. We talked about if you offer 20%, obviously the return is going to be much bigger because 20% of the median price, so your returns are high, 9.53. And if you offer 80%, your returns for every dollar you spend is 3.49. So those are the, like I said, total long term. So it's going to take a little bit for obviously to reap the benefits, but in the long run you will. So then we went a little bit further because we're extra, and we said, well, what are the impacts we can have on things like gender inequality and poverty? So our business as usual scenario, you change nothing and we're using the labor survey of living conditions, the raw gap is about 5.1% favoring men. But if you go under a universal access policy, that gap drops by 2.9 percentage points, so 2.2%. Poverty rates drop from 26% from the business as usual scenario to 23%. So just to summarize, the expansion of childcare, that leads to significant benefits. And in every scenario we ran, there was some level of return. So the thing is, we presented basically direct and the indirect measures, but you don't have to take those 2 cents. You could do something like some sort of mixture, some sort of PPP or something. So, and we think that probably some incentives for employers, to support childcare, that could probably work, take the burden off the government a bit. But yeah, that's it for now. And again, shameless plug, read the study. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Also, a very interesting topic. Compared to water, we all pay water. We don't all have kids, but kids are part of our society and are part of our future, right? So we need to make sure we're building a society that really caters and cares for them. And what I take from your presentation is something very important, right? When we think about policies or interventions, we focus on the cost, but what are the actual benefits? It's not just, oh, I want to leave my kid in daycare, please government pay for it. No, it's I want to leave my kid in daycare so I can go and work and I can be a productive being of this society and I can pay my taxes. So there's actually a return when that mother is freed, can go to work, can have a formal job and actually contributing to the NIS, paying taxes, and even her consumption level can go up because he has a higher earnings, she's gonna pay VAT. So it's very important that we make the link and we break that cycle of thinking, oh, this is gonna cost me money, right? No, let's think on how am I as a society, as a government, gonna benefit for the intervention. So thank you for that. Now we're moving to the Q&A section. So please get ready with your questions. I'll start with one, so you have time to start thinking on your question, and just raise your hand when you're ready. So some of the points that we've touched here are related to privacy, right? And when we think about administrative data, we're thinking about very, very sensitive data. Some of it may not be as sensitive, like maybe it's not that important what score you got in high school, but whether you were arrested or not, that's very sensitive and it's private information and it should not be available to everyone, right? So how do you strike that balance between collecting the data? The data is collected, but between giving us access from the government to researchers to that data, but also preserving that confidentiality in a world that is more and more interconnected and where we see data breaches happening everywhere in even not only in Caribbean countries, but in highly developed countries as well. So who wants to start answering that question?
Well, I'll get us started. There are some very basic protocols that researchers are accustomed to doing. So even things such as storing the data, researchers are accustomed to storing the data or encrypting the data so that when you give a researcher access to data, we're not just storing it on a flash drive. We're making sure that if that flash drive, if we're using a flash drive, we're using some type of encryption software to make sure that even if we lose that flash drive, someone else cannot access the data. So I think what is required is essentially just standards for the access and utilization of data. And once you have those standards, it ensures that that very confidential data doesn't get out into the public and expose someone's very personal information.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Winston has just mentioned, because, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, right, to merge all these different administrative data, and one of the key limitations of the different sources of administrative data, as we have been discussed, they are usually disconnected, right? So you cannot connect people across different registries. And adding to that, when sometimes you go and look at historical records, often the agencies would not have collected individual IDs. So there's not like an individual ID who could link directly all these different sources. So for example, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, to link of this data, there was need to use personal information, names, date of birth, and gender. And actually, that information, specifically, the advantage is that having the specific date of birth, like month, year, day, that reduces the dimensionality so much that you end up using very old data with matching rates above 98%. So it's good. It's good. The information is there. You could use it. But that also brings the challenge of confidentiality. Because it's not that we are interested in knowing, oh, Minister Humphrey, how much he scored in the common entrance. But you eventually need the information to link this data to be useful for the analysis, right? So it's very important to protect. And for that, as Winston had just said, in Trinidad and Tobago, we took like almost 2-3 years to come up with a protocol, right? For fully protecting the data. For example, to matching with the National Insurance Board data, which is very sensitive because it's all your earnings history. Actually, we had to do the matching in the computers, in the secure computers of the National Insurance Board. I remember Karina was there when I was a week there working in their computers. And then after doing this matching, properly anonymize the data, and you have an anonymized database, but where you can already follow, the people over time. The good news is that the technology exists. I can give examples of fully digitalized societies, right? That the Scandinavian countries, Estonia, they do have this technology. So we don't have to invent the wheel. It's there. And we can exploit it for the benefit of this type of applications that we have spoken about today.
I think about it. I think that's really great. But one of the biggest issues you have is not so much that, for example, the data sometimes is still in hard copy. So in terms of accessing your data and keeping it anonymous, the biggest issue you have is that how can you do that when it's still in hard copy? So that goes back to probably saying, okay, maybe we can move towards having all the data in soft copy, having persons trained in making the data anonymous so that possibly the data can be shared with person without having to worry about confidentiality issues. To me, that seems like a good solution. If it isn't a case that you give me the data for all the identifiers, if you give me that data, you have to then hope that I'm honest or I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure it remains confidential. But if we start from in-house, for example, where data from the beginning is set up like that, you don't have as big of an issue in terms of sharing because even if, yes, you hope that people still follow the protocols, but if something happens, somebody can't then figure out, oh,
Comfort level.
exactly. So that's where it goes. And like I said, the problem would be that a lot of data is hard copy.
Thank you. So you're hinting to a barrier, right? Is whenever you come up with a policy or research question and you want to access that data and you know it's there, your first barrier is in hard copy. What other barriers are you facing that prevents you from doing the research you would like to?
I can start.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not just that it's in hard copy. Sometimes it's in hard copy and at various different locations. Sometimes people don't know where it is, so it exists. Or sometimes there's poor storage practices where sometimes people use it for one thing and then they remove it. I remember trying to do a study with the poverty, getting some data from, there was the ministry, welfare department, sorry. And they were like, right, well, you know, and it was a case where just getting certain information was really challenging because it's not necessarily a habit of having like a nice time series over time and stuff like that. So those are some of the challenges because the data, a lot of times you have that admin data, but persons don't use it for various purposes. They use it to, you know, this is for this task and this task only. So there's no proper data storage stuff going on. That's one of the biggest challenges. So even when it does exist.
For me, I think one of the things that occurs within a number of these organizations is that they don't have proper definitions. So that when Winston Moore enters the data, I use Winston Moore's definition. When Mahala Jackman enters the data, she uses her definition. And so you have these changes in the definition of what exactly is a household or what exactly is their consumption level. And that changes over time. And that can be a significant problem coming in as a researcher because I don't know what are the definitions that are being utilized. So what is actually necessary for these organizations is that they actually have standards and definitions of the variables and the data that they're collecting so that those standards are not needed just for researchers, but that those standards are needed for you as the policymaker to make sure that you are receiving consistent data when you come into the public domain and you make a speech. You know that you're making the speech using the correct data, right? And so having those standards and those guides will be very useful within the organization.
And I think all these points point to the need of having a structural approach to this, right? There are different agencies across the public sector, as my colleague have just correctly pointed out, storing data, you know, sometimes there is hard copy, historical data, different standards. So to really leapfrog, and I think Barbados is uniquely positioned to that because the size is manageable, right? We're not speaking of a country of 100 million people. Data is there. In particular, we have digitalized some of hard copy data. But if we look at the structural level, of how can this be useful for the government, not for research purpose, maybe also for research purpose, but for the government, for shaping policies, there is a need to have a structural view of the full landscape and start with what has been mentioned here indirectly. An initial baseline mapping, real baseline mapping, right? Of what the agencies have, what type of data, how it's stored, whether there are some data that could be digitalized or not. So looking this as a national priority, right? Because in reality, Barbados, in my view, is uniquely positioned across Caribbean countries to actually have a demonstration effect and become a digitalized society like Estonia, for example. And I'm not dreaming, it's a reality. But it needs a high-level commitment. And the good news is that, as you may know, the IDB has just launched the One Caribbean program, and we have secured technical cooperation funds to help at least 2 Caribbean countries in this endeavor. So we would really love to partner with Barbados to do this. Initial mapping, serious a strategic mapping on what type of administrative data is there to actually do this baseline to see how this could be put together in a truly digitalized society, right? And that's feasible. It's totally feasible, and in relatively short time, I would say. But there is need for a high-level committee.
So what I get from what you're saying is that you're looking for a champion and not looking at anyone in particular. They can push the agenda of the value of administrative data, right? Yes. Good. So questions from the audience? Please go to the microphone, introduce yourself. Thank you for being the brave one.
Hey, good morning. I'm glad to see so many faces that don't know, so they won't be fed up of hearing me answer this question. To the others, I apologize. Daniel Ramratan from the CDB. Just a question, because we've had about an hour-long discussion so far on administrative data, and I think we failed to mention one agency, which is the agency that could bring it all together, the statistics offices of our countries. And there needs to be a wholesome discussion now on how do we connect the dots. Administrative data is meant to feed through a system, it's meant to be comparable, it's meant to be collated in a manner that it could be brought out in a non-identifiable but universally valued measure. And that is where the stats offices come in. So if we're speaking about going from data to research, we need to create the statistics that we could use in the research. So my question is, as we talk about administrative data, what do you all see is the role to strengthen that flow, that when we speak about births, when we speak about deaths, they go through the system, they feed into population projections, they feed into the meaningful indicators we need. And just to use one example, death coding, not death as in fiscal, but death as in mortality, is such a specific nature of coding where a doctor will list 3 causes of death. And you need to be able to identify what's the primary cause to list it as mortality due to X or Y. And as we speak about NCDs and so forth, I flag that. Because a lot of times in administrative data, we perform our functions as a ministry based on our responsibilities. But we need the centralized agency to make it comparable. Thanks.
I'm trying.
Sorry,
I'm trying not to respond because this has been one. If you're a researcher, this has been one of our bugbears for a number of years. We really, as a region, invest so little in our national statistical agencies. Our agencies produce data in spite of what we invest in them. So we have in Barbados we're supposed to have a national statistical system, which brings together all of the agencies. But you see, Minister Humphrey, that issue that you mentioned, the issue of not sharing data, it still comes up within the public sector. So imagine that you are a national statistical agency and you request data from one of the ministries and you can't get the data. It's very frustrating. And you then are responsible for producing national statistics such as GDP. Not even something such as poverty, right? You have to produce GDP, which everyone looks at. And you can't get data from your public sector agencies. And if you can't get data from your public sector agencies, it doesn't set a precedent for the private sector to then provide data as well. We've had a number of really great projects with the IDB and some of our donors to help enhance the statistical capacity of our national data collection agencies. And I think there's been some really good work. But what we do need is maybe a model similar to what exists in other countries where the statistical agency actually has its own revenue stream. Because if you depend on the revenue stream of government, then you're always going to be in a cost-cutting mode. So I've always been always been a consistent proponent of having the National Statistical Agency be first independent, maybe having a board, and then also developing some income-generating activities to ensure that they're a little bit self-sufficient from the government's purse. But those will be the views of Winston Moore and not the University of the West Indies.
you want to add something? No?
I fully agree, and it's not, and it's usually the norm in countries that have been able to advance in this, right? So there is always an entity which is the clearinghouse of data. Specifically, I recently started doing some research with data from Denmark, and there's only one agency where you go and you request, data across. So it's not that I go to the Ministry of Health, oh, can I have this, or the Ministry of Education? No. There's only one, right? Which clearinghouses everything. Okay, we're very sophisticated systems and everything. And that's what I'm saying is totally feasible here, right? It's a matter of finding the right consensus for the legal framework, right? And for what Winston is suggesting. And it's not something that we're inventing the wheel. I mean, it's something that exists, and we can learn from countries that already have it, right?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Congratulations again to the panel. Some really good presentations.
Thank you.
Very curious, and this is something for all three of you, on the point of clustering and how this information that you've collected reflects the realities of how communities are shaped, right? Professor Moore, you presented how you see poverty change in some of the parishes. And I'd be very interested to know, are you guys able to, within your statistics, look at how specific communities at the community level are shifting, right? And Deetha, it's the same question for you, right? With the data that you have at schools, you could imagine schools cluster around certain communities of vulnerability, and those communities are also clustered around some of the same dynamics we're picking up on arrests, etc. So is there at this point ability to tease out at a community level where, policymakers really are focused, how the stories of these communities are shifting?
That's a really good question, and this is one of the reasons that I miss the classroom, because in the classroom you get some really good ideas for research papers. That is a really great idea for a research paper. But what I can tell you from the poverty data is that, and it's a little bit unfortunate, poverty, if you have a high rate of poverty in a particular region, it tends to stay the same. So if you look at that data, regions in Barbados that have higher rates of poverty, they still continue to have high rates of poverty. Maybe the rate of change has slowed down in terms of the rate of increase in poverty has slowed down, but those regions continue to have the same rate of poverty. It speaks to a number of different things. So it speaks to the issues that Mahalia raised in relation to universal childcare. It speaks to the issues that Dieter spoke to as well in terms of education. I really love Dieter's paper and the concept, because we have this concept in Barbados that you can only succeed if you go to one of the older secondary schools. But when you crunch the data, the newer secondary schools are actually doing a really great job of moving the individuals from where they receive them to where they actually go. So if you're really going to make a change in terms of poverty, what is actually needed is for us to utilize the data and see how we can support those newer secondary schools to do the really great job that they're already doing.
Yeah, and no, it's very relevant, because in what I mentioned about the case of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, where thanks to this detailed, right, full population data, we can have estimates of the value add of each school, right? So we are also in this endeavor that is starting now with a new loan in Trinidad and Tobago of exploring, right, what are the practices and what is the schools are doing to improve outcomes. One of the let's say inputs that we're exploring is the context, right? The context in which these schools are, which includes where are they located. And we have done some initial qualitative visits to school, because we already knew, I knew, okay, this school in particular, I want to visit because it's the first one in reducing crime. So we went there with Karina, Laventil success, I think, which is located in a high crime area, but is one of the most effective schools in reducing crime of their students. So I was what are they doing? So when we visited, I was talking with all the teachers, what do you do? And they had a very nice programs of after school sports or arts programs. So they, because they know what the challenge they are facing, and they have adapted all their curricula and their pedagogic strategy, conscious of that, saying, we know these kids are at risk, so we're trying to take them out of risk with positive activities. The key was we keep them busy. Right? And it's working because I have historical data that is actually, I didn't know this. I just had the estimate that this school was the best in reducing crime. I want to go to this school. And when you speak, the other school, right, that was very good at improving long-term employment. So what is this school doing? It was a school very rural, right, in Trinidad. And it was, then I really trusted the estimates because what do you do? Okay, we teach for CSEC, okay, yes, but they have developed actually like a technical vocational training institution within the school in terms of agriculture, hydroponics, but with very technical, that you will find that in a really technical school, they were implemented by themselves in the school. And this school is one of the best and improving long-term employment success of their students. Right? So schools are doing things that we sometimes don't know. But when having these clean estimates of a school value added, what we're doing is that more systematically, going and documenting what are they doing. So we can identify practices that are more correlated with labor market success, practices that are more correlated with reducing crime. And what we aim to is to design a package of practices with the potential to improve every angle of success of the kids. And then try to implement that in the schools that we're going to intervene with the loan. So it's a loan that we're aiming at really learning from the local context with robust evidence to improve the education for everybody, right? And that's what I would like to start doing in other Caribbean countries. So we can do it here. We're starting to do it also in Jamaica, where we have many more schools. And I think it's a very rich agenda, given the context that I have shown you of potential huge learning in this from the Caribbean.
Thank you. We're running out of time. One last question from the audience.
Yes, I'd like to say so far, it's been a wonderful panel. And as a struggling UE student, to start open up with that. All right. Be too long. This question is actually directed to you, Professor Moore. As you mentioned, the pricing of like the unhealthy foods to the healthy foods now. All right. Coming from a Caribbean country where I can say that we shifted from an agrarian, from agrarian to tourism-based industry, which I believe you all did the same at some point as well. And you mentioned that the manufacturing as well in Barbados. So seeing that it comes down whether like the production level is not as high as you would want it to be here. Yeah. What exactly, what incentives would you put based for the farmers to try to help them with the whole, curbing the whole importation, the whole importation tariffs? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that I've heard coming here in my time here at UWI is that Barbados is very expensive. Right. And actually yesterday, funny enough, my friends and I were kind of talking how at the vending machine, it went like from, one of the drinks went from $2.50 to $2.75. And I just said, that's inflation for you. And so, just considering, just thinking of my little macro, the whole consumer price index, thinking, man, the basket of groceries these days looking awfully slim. So I just wanted to ask, what do you think would be best, or one of the initiatives could be taken by the government, by Minister Humphreys, can you say as to curb that?
Oh boy, I thought the YA was my friend. Because you're gonna bring up my socialist side now. Economists are not supposed to be socialists. I'm supposed to be a dirty capitalist.
Marxists said otherwise.
So I think we in smaller countries tend to shy away from more collaborative approaches to doing business. I think I like that word, collaborative approaches. So say, for example, in relation to agriculture, there's nothing wrong with having contracts between your tourism entities, your university, your tertiary education institutions, so that the farmer has some level of consistency in terms of demand. I think there's always be the issue as a small farmer. You have to not only grow the food, but you also have to go out there and hustle to sell the food, and which leads to these up and down cycles which you're accustomed to seeing in your microeconomics classes in terms of not only prices but also supply. So contracts are really useful, and we really need to see how we can support. This isn't a government issue. This is more a private sector issue, and this is also an issue in terms of putting processes in place to see how we can support our farming community. Secondly, in terms of manufacturing, the way how we've tried to protect manufacturing is that we've tried to push the price up by having really high levels of tariffs. But what manufacturers really need is that they need a market. And the same thing always is the best approach. So, and this is where maybe the government's procurement process can really help. So within the hospital, you have to make sure that your local agro-processing manufacturers get first preference to those contracts. Within the larger institutions that purchase products, they should have a preference as well. So rather than focusing your policies on tariffs, if you focus your policies on more supply side support for businesses, I think that's a better approach. And therefore, you can then push down the prices on the other unhealthy foods. And then you can then use your tariffs to push up the price of imported unhealthy foods as well. And that might be a better approach to not only supporting farmers, supporting manufacturers, but also pushing down the price for local consumers.
And I saw another person that really wanted to ask a question.
Morning. This question, I guess, is directed at Dr. Deither. I wanted to ask if the policies are... Sorry, give me a second. If the ideas or the policies that you suggested, if it is in line with the, if you would say if it's in line with the decision recently to, I don't want to say abolish, but yeah, to abolish the common entrance. Because when you started talking, that's the direction I thought I was going in, but then you started putting emphasis on how the choice system was being adopted across more and more, the original choice system was being adopted across more and more countries, so I wasn't necessarily sure. Yeah, that's what I want to know, if it is in line with that decision, if you would say it supports that decision or not.
Thank you very much for the question, because I heard some information about the discussions going forward, right, in Barbados specifically, about the possibility of departing from the current system, right? And when I heard that from the colleagues at the education department, I was saying, oh my God, this is going to be very rare, right? Because that will be going against the trend of all the recent research and the actual reality of what the most developed countries are adopting, because it has been shown to be a system that is more efficient, more equitable, and that has impacted significantly the outcomes of students recently as well. So first, I haven't had the chance to speak directly to this, but I would love to provide the inputs in this discussion. I really, in all my years working in the Caribbean, I have talked with a lot of persons, and I understand the concerns about this type of system, because it's true that by allocating students based on one single exam, the worry is that why we should determine, right, the future of a student because of an exam that you wrote in the one day. Maybe that day you were not sharp enough, or the result of that exam would heavily depend also on your socioeconomic status, because richer parents could afford more tutoring and so forth. Okay, that's valid, but that doesn't invalidate the system itself, because for that system to work, you need two inputs: the preferences of parents, which is the choice, right? And then how you distribute the students. You need something to prioritize, right? The students, to see, who is being allocated first, second. Currently, you prioritize students based on this exam. And that's the main discussion thing. It's not the system itself, but how can we improve equity in the way in which prioritize students? And that's another question. Just don't burn what you have, because what you have is the best. But if the concern is how you prioritize, because the current measure with which you prioritize could be exacerbating pre-existing inequalities, because what I have said, right, the richer parents can afford more the tutoring, so that's another thing, because that could be refined. The prioritizations could not be only based on one academic exam. It could be based also on socio-emotional variables that can be measured across primary school. It could be also based on a component of service to the society. So the issue is not the system, it's the input that we're using to make the prioritization. And that input, I totally agree, could be refined to be more equitable. But don't abandon the system. The system, you will be a case study worldwide of leaving the best for something that everybody, all the most developed societies are adopting, right? So I discussed this with Kirabo Jackson. He's one of the world. After he was appointed by the current president of the U.S., because most of the U.S. districts is adopting this system. And we are totally willing to join this discussion and to help the country to achieve the best outcome. So please count us in, but please don't abandon. It could be refined, I totally agree. It could be even more equitable, totally agree. But the answer is not leaving the system. The answer is making it work better for everybody, because that's the best system. Don't abandon it.
Thank you, Dieter. So, of course, we ran out of time, but I don't want to leave without asking this very important question. And this is for you, Mihalia. We have many students here. This is a great partnership between the university and the IDB. So maybe we've sparked some interest in some of them, and they want to pursue a career in either policy making or research or using data in some way. Very, very quickly, what piece of advice do you have for them?
Pay attention to your econ classes.
Great.
Well, that's hard. If you're interested in going into policy, what do you do? Well, I guess it starts from, I would encourage them to probably start by probably engaging a little bit more in these certain areas. Like, we're always looking for students to join us in terms of little research projects or anything like that, and to kind of expose them more to it, just to make sure it's actually the path you want to go down. I would encourage them to come to things like this where they can, engage with persons and, just get a general gist. But generally, though, if we be realistic, pay attention to your econ courses, because because it's either, we talk about the sheepskin effects, right? How they determine where you go, how you get a job. We could talk about education being a signal for being, you smarter or whatever, but it's really just a signal, and that's it really. There's nothing much there.
Thank you. So thank you very much, people of the audience, our panelists, our presenters. I think it's been a truly wonderful experience in hosting the event. I think we're sparking great conversations, and we hope that they continue. And I want to say something before we leave. This event could not have been possible without the help of many people, but two in particular. One is standing right there at the back of the room, Kia Richards. Thank you very much. A round of applause. And the other one, I don't see her. I suspect she's upstairs, Camille Dowridge. So they've been great and wonderful. And we have some refreshments outside. Feel free to hang out for a while, ask questions. We're going to be here for a while, and enjoy the rest of your day.